How's it, as we say here in South Africa? Welcome to another edition of Richard's Rock Rambles. So we're going to finish off our prog rock journey for the moment, and we're going to have a look at one of the bands that simply have to be in that journey. In fact, they're probably in the top 5 of prog rock groups, guys that really made that genre their own, and one of the pioneers of the prog rock sound, along with King Crimson, Genesis, Pink Floyd, and a few others. Of course, I'm talking about the band Yes from the UK, a band that I think is still around today, although, of course, along with everybody else, there's not much going on with the band, no touring. I'm not sure if they're recording. I know there have been a number of lineup changes of late, the past couple of years. I don't have an entire discography of the band, but the albums that I do have, I think, are the ones that cemented their place in the prog rock genre and the ones that I think are worth chatting about. So hopefully this will turn you on to them. A great band. As I said, they've had numerous members over the years, but whoever's played in the band have all been consummate musicians, all on the top of their game. So yeah, let's have a look and see what I have. As I said, they formed in London in 1968. The original lineup was John Anderson on vocals. He's been with them right throughout their career. Chris Squire, bass and vocals. Sadly, Chris passed away a number of years back from, I think it was cancer. Peter Banks on guitar. He was the original guitarist. I think he lasted for the first 2 albums. Tony Kaye on keyboards. He would come back in the 80s to the band, so he started with him and he came back later. And the great Bill Bruford on drums. Of course, Bill Bruford, after Yes, would move on to King Crimson. He's also played with UK. He's done a lot of solo albums. Amazing drummer. So all these musos were pretty good, pretty sharp. I think if you played in Yes, you had to be sharp because of the style that they played, you know, the long passages, the intricate time changes and what have you. But there was also a lot of melody within Yes, a lot of classical influences as well. As I said, there have been numerous members over the years. Other notable members have been Steve Howe on guitar. He replaced Peter Banks. Alan White on drums. He replaced Bill Bruford. The great Rick Wakeman on keyboards. He would replace Tony Kaye. Of course, Rick Wakeman, prior to Yes, was in Straubs. So they pinched him from Straubs and he joined Yes, and he would be in and out the band for pretty much the whole of the 70s. He also had a very big solo career as well. Jeff Downs on keyboards. He came later. He was there with one of the other, Trevor... I think it was Trevor, can't remember his name now, not Trevor Raven. Regardless, he came later on keyboards, and he would also be part of the band Asia, that big band that featured John Wetton, Carl Palmer, and Steve Howe. That was also another offshoot of Yes. And last but not least, our very own Trevor Raven from South Africa. He joined in the 80s. And I think if it hadn't been for Trevor Raven, Yes would have died a death. What he did was he gave them a good old kick up the what's-it, changed the whole sound, made it more relevant to the 80s. And with that album that came out with him, 90125, they just took off. Had a massive hit single, Owner of a Lonely Heart, and that gave them a new lease on life. And they did pretty well with Trevor Raven in the ranks. They did a couple of tours with him. So, yeah, he was also a notable member. So, let's just have a look at the albums that I have. So, I'm going to start off with their 3rd album, simply called the Yes album. And this one features Tony Kaye, that's him there on keyboards, and Bill Bruford over there. That's John Anderson, the vocalist, Chris Squire on bass, so if you can see that. And there's the new member, Steve Howe, who would be with the band for a number of years afterwards. In fact, I think he's still in the band. This was an album that really broke the band. They hadn't done much with the first 2 albums. I'm not quite sure which direction they were going in. So what do we have on here? Side 1, Yours Is No Disgrace. That was a big hit off this album. The Clap, which featured Steve Howe on some great acoustic work, really great acoustic guitarists as well as electric. The track Starship Trooper, which has got 3 different sections, Life Seeker, Disillusion and Worm. That was a great track as well. And then on side 2, I've Seen All Good People, which was another hit off the album, Adventure and Perpetual Change. So here you had John Anderson vocals, Chris Squire bass, guitar and vocals. He was also a great singer, Chris Squire, and his vocals, his harmony with John Anderson was great. Very similar voice actually. Steve Howe, electric and acoustic guitars, also on vocal. He had a slightly deeper voice. Tony Kaye, piano, organ and Moog, and Bill Bruford on drums and percussion. And this one came out in 1970, the autumn of 1970. A really great album, and this is the one that set them off on their way. So they followed that up with the album Fragile. This is a very fragile copy that I have here. I got this second hand at a vinyl fair. Cover's not up to scratch, but the record inside is good, which is the main thing. Another great album with some outstanding tracks. Roundabout, which would become a staple of the band. That was played at almost all their live concerts, I think, up to this day. Cans and Brahms, We Have Heaven, South Side of the Sky, 5% for Nothing, Long Distance Runaround, that was another hit. The Fish, Mood for a Day, and Heart of the Sunrise, another hit. Some beautiful passages in here. That was what I like about Yes, the melodic side to them, as opposed to ELP perhaps, which was a bit more bombastic. They could be, but they also had a lot of the melody. I think that was a lot of that was down to John Anderson, who was the main songwriter along with Chris Squire. So this is the vinyl, so it gives you the lineup and all the lyrics, which is quite cool. So that was Fragile, which was another step up for the band. The following album, to me, is one of the top 5 prog albums of all time. And we're talking about Close to the Edge by Yes. That album and this one, the covers were done by the great artist Roger Dean. He would have quite a history with the band. And there's the guys at the back, some live shots. And there's Roger Dean's artwork, which is really cool. So what do we have on this album? Let's have a look inside. Close to the Edge, the title track, stunning track. Steve Howe really brought something new to this band and his style of guitar work. Not a Joe Satriani. He could be flash when he wanted to, but he just had a particular sound and a tone on his guitar. Total Mass Retain, I Get Down, Seasons of Man, Siberian Katru, that was a brilliant track. That was probably my favorite track off this album. Quite a long track as well. And You and I, that was another hit off this album. Eclipse, The Preacher, The Teacher. Stunning album. If you haven't got this in your collection, I urge you to go and get it. One of the best prog rock albums you'll ever hear. Especially for bands coming out of the UK, I think this is probably the top. Along with Genesis, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, or Selling England by the Pound. This is definitely up there. So then there were a number of lineup changes over the years, people coming and going. Rick Wakeman left the band for, wasn't happy with the way things were going and he wanted to do some solo stuff. He came back a few years later and did an album called Going for the One, which is another great album. And yeah, this is the gatefold sleeve, which is really cool. That's what I love about vinyl. You get that whole something you can grab onto. You can't really grab onto an MP3 and say, gee, look at this. And that's what you can do with vinyl. Wondrous Stories, that was the big hit off here. Lovely track. Great vocals from John Anderson. It took me a while to get into Yes, and I'll tell you why. John Anderson's vocals with that sort of soprano-y kind of high-pitched voice took me a while to get into. But once I got into it, once I got a bit older and I appreciated the music a bit more, I really got into this band. And that's one of the tracks that I really enjoy. Wondrous Stories. Awaken, What else is on here? Turn of the Century, Going for the One, the title track. That's also great. Lots of interesting time changes in there. And Parallels. So yeah, this is another album that I think gave them a step up, because before this album they were struggling a bit to find their identity again, and lineup changes. You know, as with every band in the 70s, all successful bands, they have your ups and downs, and they certainly had quite a few. So then they struggled on for a few more albums, and then it looked as though Yes's day was done. And as I said, along comes a certain Trevor Raven from South Africa, and they released this album, 90125. Very much an 80s sounding band, 80s sound, especially the drums, lots of synths, new synthesizers they were trying out, new recording techniques. I think it's very difficult to compare this to early Yes. It's a totally different beast, it's a totally different Yes, different sound. But nonetheless, this spoke to the people at the time, and it was a huge hit, sold gazillions of copies. Obviously, the big hit of here was Owner of a Lonely Heart, which was massive radio play here, as I'm sure it was at the rest of the world. Hold On, It Can Happen, Changes, which is my favorite track on here, which is very prog-like, lots of time changes, and just a really interesting track. The track Cinema, which was actually the name that they were going to call the band until John Anderson rejoined, because he wasn't in this band initially when they were going to record this. And he rejoined, and then they said, let's just call it Yes. And that seemed to work. Leave It, Our Song, City of Love, which are really heavy riff from Trevor Raven, which is quite unlike Yes. And the track Hearts, produced by Trevor Horn. That was the Trevor I couldn't think of earlier. That was his name, Trevor Horn. He produced this album. He was actually the vocalist in a previous album called Drama. So he produced it. Great production. Helped, obviously, with Trevor Raven, who was quite into production and things like that. Trevor Raven obviously went on to do lots of movie soundtracks. That was where he made his money as well. Plus, he had some really great solo albums, Trevor Raven. In fact, there's one called Jacaranda from a few years ago, which you should maybe check out. Does all the instruments on there. Seriously talented guy. So all the guys in Yes had solo albums throughout the 70s and 80s. The one I want to mention is the Chris Squire album called Fish Out of Water. That was his nickname in the band, was Fish. So Fish Out of Water, out of the band. Get it? Interesting album. Some really great... He's actually a very good voice as well. Very similar to John Anderson, actually. So some of his old buddies from Yes helped him out here. Bill Bruford on drums. Patrick Moraz on keyboards. Patrick Moraz was also in Yes for a while on keyboards. Yeah, really nice album. There's a shot of a young Chris Squire. You got all the song lyrics. Really good album. Hold Out Your Hand, You By My Side, Silently Falling is really cool. Lucky 7 and Safe. And this came out in 1975. So still very much a member of Yes, but he just wanted to do something on his own. You know, sometimes within a band you're kind of restricted because you have to do what the style the band is normally known for. And if you want to do a solo album, you have to go and do your thing. Really cool album cover as well. Chris Squire. So I just want to mention a couple of DVDs. I don't have all of them. Before I do that, the most recent studio album is Heaven and Earth from 2014. I don't think they've done anything since that album. And other notable ones, Yes from 1969, their first album. Time and a Word from 1970. Tales from Topographic Oceans from 1973. Bit of controversy with that album. I think that was a bit too self-indulgent, a bit too up their own whatsits with that album. It went over a lot of people's heads. John Anderson's vocals and lyrics were out there. Nobody knew what it was about in the band except John. So that album didn't really... There's some great music on there, but it's really heavy going to listen to that. Relayer from 1974. Tomato from 78, which also didn't do much. The band was a bit fractured at that time. Drama from 1980, which featured Trevor Horn. Union from 1991, when everybody in Yes got back together for a terrible album. It didn't work. The tour worked well. The album wasn't that great. So you had Rick Wakeman on stage, Tony Kaye, Trevor Raven, Steve Howe, John Anderson, Chris Squire, Bill Bruford, and Alan White. All these dudes who were in the group at one stage or another on stage together. It's actually quite a cool video if you can get hold of it to check. And then they did an album in 1994 with Trevor Raven, Alan White, and I think Chris Squire, called Talk. Really good album. Didn't do much in sales-wise, but interesting album. Excuse me. So yeah, most recent is Heaven and Earth 2014. There is a really great triple live album called Yes Songs from 1973, when they were at their peak in the early 70s. Lots of great keyboard work and guitar work from Steve Howe especially. If you can get hold of that, it's one of the best live albums from the 70s. They were finally, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in their infinite wisdom, inducted them into the Hall of Fame in 2017. They had been up for nominated, I don't know how many times. They should have been in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame years before that, but who knows what goes on in those guys' heads. Some of the people that they've inducted recently have got absolutely nothing to do with rock and roll, but that's a story for another day. They were inducted in by Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson from Rush, one of the later prog bands, which is really cool to see them doing I think they played Roundabout with him on stage, which is really nice. Trevor Raven was there as well. So lastly, I want to check some of the DVDs, and I want to thank my good friend Noel Small, who lent me a couple of these DVDs. In fact, I watched one half of this one last night, which is pretty much a comprehensive history of Yes, interviews with all the guys. Disc 1, The Story of Yes, 210-minute program, exclusive interviews, Trevor Horn, Jeff Downs, Chris Squire, the whole lot. Disc 2 is got 140 minutes unseen footage, extended interviews. So there's a lot on here, and what I saw last night was really well put together. The only thing I noticed was they didn't do much of the interviewing of Trevor Raven, and I thought he was such an integral part of the band in the 80s who gave them another, lease of life. But in any case, it's still really good, well shot, and interesting interviews. So there's that one. There's another history of called Yes Years, which isn't as comprehensive as that one. This one is a few years before. It says here the definitive Yes documentary, although I think that one's better. Exclusive interviews, behind the scenes footage from their 91 reunion tour. So here you get the whole reunion tour story. All the hits: Heart of the Sunrise, Owner of a Lonely Heart, Leave It, Tempest Fugit. It's another one to check out. Then there's Keys to Ascension by Yes. That was one of their later albums, so this was from that tour. I haven't seen this yet, but I'm sure it'll be pretty good. Another one to check out. And Live from the House of Blues, the House of Yes. I think this was during the Ladder tour. The Ladder was one of their later albums. So there's quite a few tracks on here as well. Face to Face, The Messenger, some of the more recent tracks from the Ladder. And so I must still have a look at that as well. So looking forward to that. So some videos to check out. So there we go. That's Yes, one of the top 5 prog rock bands of all time. And if you haven't dived into their discography yet, I think it's time. As I said, I didn't immediately latch onto them, but over time I really got to enjoy their stuff. I'm still collecting their albums. I'm trying to get all the vinyl, and of course that's kind of difficult these days because some of them are out of print. So I think we're going to leave the prog rock thing there for a moment. I might come back to it at a later stage, talk about some other bands. But I think next time we're going to dive into the world of blues rock. There's a lot to talk about there. And I think as a kickoff, one of my favorite guitarists of all time, we're going to look at the great Robin Trower. So I'll see you guys next time. Please like and subscribe down below. Any comments, more than welcome. And we shall see you next time. Have a safe week. See you soon. Cheers.